In this video we will test the performance of two different PCs when pushing the most popular tower defense game to its limits to see how much better hardware really affects lag in this particular game, and we will explore other ways that you can get a smoother playing experience as well. BTD6 is not a game filled with so-called frame snobs that wants more FPS just for the sake of it. Those people usually reside in popular esports titles like CS and Overwatch. After all, it is a tower defense game. The movements are not as fast as many FPS titles, so why should you care about getting more FPS anyway? 60 is fine, and above 120 you will probably have a hard time noticing any difference, even though you might in another title. But Bloons is different in the sense that the FPS you get varies greatly on what you choose to play in the game. A normal game of chimps trying to black border a map won't get you any lag whatsoever. But if you are attempting to get as far as possible on a given map, or if you're trying to get a good ranked time on the weekly boss event, you are in for an experience that is not nearly as smooth. Here we are talking about low single-digit FPS, which is pretty unfortunate because these two ways of playing the game are pretty popular. But why is it like this? I mean, it's a simple monkey game. Is everyone who is lagging just people playing on an iPhone from 10 years ago? Or is there something else at play here? Here's a clip where I send out 999 round 400 fortified bad balloons with 20 units of spacing on my old PC, which has a CPU that was released 8 years ago, the Intel i7-6800K, paired with an Nvidia GTX 1080 graphics card. The screen is filled with sun avatars, and as the bads get further along the track, the lag increases as more and more sun avatars are attacking at the same time, and eventually we reach a stable FPS of 11 with dips down to 10. If we instead send all 999 bads at the same time, in other words with zero spacing, not as many sun avatars will be shooting at the same time, so now we get a stable FPS of just under 30 and a low of 22. If we send them with a spacing of 5 units, the FPS will drop until it reaches the same 11 FPS like in the first test with 20 units of spacing, but then the FPS rises again until it reaches just under 30 FPS, just like the test with 0 spacing. And why is this? Even though the same amount of sun avatars are firing at once, as in the 20 spacing test, there are not as many projectiles on the screen at the same time. This is because since the bads have less spacing in between them, less shots from the sun avatars will miss once the bads start making their way back to the start of the track. This shows that having a lot of towers firing at once increases lag, but crucial is how long-lived those projectiles are, since the longer they stay on the screen, the more projectiles will be on the screen at any given moment, which seems to be the primary cause for the game lagging. Now let's move on and do the same test on my new PC with an i7-13700K processor and an RTX 4080 graphics card. This time the FPS becomes stable at just under 40 during the 20 spacing test compared to 11 FPS on the old PC, which is nearly 4 times more performance. So far this is looking pretty good for the new PC, but that won't be true for every situation. Also keep in mind that the FPS for every test is being very negatively affected by the fact that I'm also recording the gameplay, something we'll talk more about later. Moving on to the next test, we're doing the same thing again on the old PC, but this time we're also activating Homeland, which doubles the attack speed. The FPS went from being 10 to 11 down to 6. Doing the same test on the new PC caused the FPS to drop from nearly 40 FPS down to 10, a much larger drop than on the old PC. The next test is going to be a bit tougher. This time we have a support True Sun God, a support temple, Adora, Permabrew and Homeland. This caused our FPS to stabilize at 3, with it sometimes dropping down to 2 FPS on the old PC. The same test on the new PC gave a stable 4 FPS with the drops down to 3 FPS. Doing the same test with all of the bads sent out at once resulted in lows of 3 and 6 FPS respectively. Next I will show that just having towers on the screen will affect your FPS. Here on the old PC I have around 110 FPS with nothing going on, and when I sell all of the towers that shoots up to almost 600. And here I go from about 230 FPS to over 1000 FPS after selling some snipers on the new PC. I assume this is all because even if a tower is not attacking, the game still needs to constantly check if it should be attacking, which takes up resources. Now that we have done a couple of tests, let's talk a bit about why this game can be so laggy. Bloons TD6 is a game that does not have a lot of graphics to load. If you compare it to, say, Cypherpunk, which has a crazy amount of high detail textures to render, BTD6 is nothing. Even a budget graphics card can handle it with ease. What makes Bloons TD6 lag, as we mentioned before, is mostly the live projectiles, but also the idle towers. For every projectile in the game has to constantly calculate its new position as it is traveling, and check if it has hit a target or not, and if so, reduce the target's HP. These calculations are not done by the graphics card, but by the CPU. And the thing about BTD6 is that these calculations are done sequentially, that is, one after the other. Some programs are multi-threaded, meaning that there are several threads of the program making calculations at the same time, but that is not how BTD6 is coded. For the game operations, we can only use one thread at a time. If you look at your threads or cores as you're playing though, you won't see one core working a lot harder than the rest, and this I believe is due to deep operating system stuff like scheduling and hyperthreading. This means that the increase in cores from the 6800K to the 13700K won't really help us. What does help us, on the other hand, is the newer architecture and higher core clocks. The single core performance, how fast each core can work on its own, is what causes the increase in FPS we saw in our testing. According to CPUbenchmark.net, the single thread rating score of the 6800K is 2271, while the 13700K got 4371, so nearly twice as fast. The test results are quite similar to this jump in performance. The idle test showed us a 2x increase, the Sun Avatar test showed us a nearly 3.5x increase, the Avatar plus Homeland test showed us a nearly 1.7x increase, the Sun God test gave us a 1.5x increase, and then doing the same thing with zero spacing gave us a 2x increase. It would seem that we often hover around that 2x mark, which is what we would expect. Keep in mind that these numbers are rough, as I did not run any software to calculate the averages. So, does buying better hardware give you a better playing experience? Yes, but not in every situation. If you make a big jump in hardware, you will notice that you can push the game further without noticing huge frame drops, as we showed with the 3.5x increase in one test. But if you push the game very far, like in super late game or ranked timed bosses, you will still get down to those 1 to 5 FPS levels anyway, because a single core or thread just can't handle all those calculations. So the only people for whom an upgrade really would make sense is for the people on hardware that is so bad that the game crashes when playing the game in this way. When you get down to the 1 to 5 FPS area, you can often get crashes if you're on basic hardware like a phone or a laptop. This problem also gets worse if you want to record your gameplay for a video, since that is also a very CPU heavy task. And this is actually a problem for some really good boss players at the moment who currently choose to not record the final 1 or 2 boss tiers because it just makes their game crash, so instead they just show the tower setup that they use for those tiers. So that's really all I had to say regarding hardware, but now let's talk about the recently added effect scale slider. You can use the slider to reduce the visual size of the projectiles all the way down to 0%, which removes them completely. A lot of people claim that this helps them a little bit when it comes to reducing lag, while others tell them no, it's the calculations that matter and not the visuals, and they are of course correct. I tested it with 50% as well as 0% projectile size, and there was no difference in frames per second. Turning down the projectiles to 0% probably helps out your graphics card a bit, but as mentioned before, that makes no difference to your FPS, since the graphics card is not even breaking a sweat anyway. So why do some users claim they notice a bit of an improvement? Well, most likely it's due to placebo. They think it should make an improvement, and with all those projectiles gone, it looks so much cleaner that it easily gets mistaken by the brain as an improvement in performance. The only other possible explanation I could think of would be if you don't even have a graphics card. Some budget laptops use integrated graphics. In other words, it's like a mini graphics card inside of your CPU. CPU. But even in this scenario, I would expect the CPU to still be the bottleneck, since if it's a budget laptop, the CPU will be budget as well, but I can't say I know for sure. So if the effect setting does not reduce lag, is there any other way you can that does not involve getting a new PC? Yes. Don't place towers. If you suffer greatly from lag, you can opt for high damage towers with a smaller number of projectiles rather than towers with tons of projectiles that deal low damage, but that kinda also means compromising your playing experience. Short of doing that, there really isn't much you can do except to make sure you don't have any other CPU intensive applications running while playing, make sure that the laptop or phone is being properly cooled, because if it gets too hot it will reduce performance in order to not break, and that can also cause a lot of crashes. And lastly, if you have your temperatures under control, you could try to overclock your existing CPU. And that's about all I know when it comes to this topic. So to everybody who's made comments saying we should convince NASA to let me play Bloons on their supercomputer, while it would be fun, it would give me less FPS than my current PC, since supercomputers is all about having a lot of cores rather than fast cores. I hope you all enjoyed this little experiment. Hopefully this answered some of your questions on this topic. You can definitely do a much deeper dive into this than I did and do a lot more tests and more accurate tests, but I just wanted to give you a rough overview so you have some idea of how hardware will affect your FPS. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one.